A few years ago, a girl was sitting with her mother and talking, and then she asked her mother for something too. Namely, that if a woman was reborn, the girl didn't want to be born. She thought that her mother didn't have to give birth to her and that she should just live for herself. The woman didn't understand why her daughter suddenly started talking about it, and she explained that in magic classes nowadays, stories about rebirth were in fashion. This only made the woman laugh, but she thought that children should be taught a little more diligently and not talk about such stories. But her daughter thought otherwise. She had thought a lot about rebirth and thought that there was nothing special about it. And she explained to her mother that even if something changed, she would still be the daughter of her mother and father. But she was the daughter of a baron, so there was no way that she could get a status higher than countess. Besides some small things, her life itself would not change. So if she had the chance, she would refuse to be born to her mother. But the woman only smiled and asked if there was such a chance. Her mother reminded the girl that she had graduated from the academy with a 6th rank, but she only awkwardly asked her mother not to mention it. The woman laughed and promised that if she had the chance, she wouldn't give birth to her daughter. Especially, she didn't want to go through all that pain and agony. She smiled and asked that her mother, if she was reborn, would meet some other man who would be better than her father. She wanted her mother to have a handsome, tall, and cool husband. She also wanted her husband to understand the pictures she was creating. But the woman only smiled sadly, explaining that her paintings were the same as her daughter's grades in magic. But the girl paid no attention to such a joke and remembered that her mother had a first love, and she wished that if her mother was reborn, she would still confess her feelings to her lover. At that time, the woman thought that all this was impossible, so she promised her daughter that she would definitely do so. But one day, it started to rain. Then everyone started screaming and calling for help, because the wagon overturned because of the slippery road, and the woman fell out of it and began to bleed because of the severe trauma. She did not yet realize what had happened to her. She did not die and was taken home. There, the doctors and her husband discussed that even if a magician came, his wife's case was too severe, and only a miracle would help her heal. The frightened man asked that the healer at least try to reduce her pain. At that moment, crying on her mother's body, her daughter began to whisper something. It was the faintly perceptible warmth of her breath and a barely audible whisper. Then the woman began to lose consciousness. The next time she opened her eyes, she found that she was in her parents' house. Later, this room was to be her niece's bedroom, so the woman could not understand what she was doing here. She began to think that the accident that had happened to her was just a dream. But suddenly a maid came in to wake her up because it was Monday, which meant she might be late for class. It was the girl's nanny, but the protagonist knew very well that her nanny had died 6 years ago. The frightened woman immediately noticed that the mistress didn't look very well, and so she suspected that she might not feel well. But the girl explained that she was fine. But she asked why the nanny was still alive, because she was dead. The frightened woman thought that the mistress had a nightmare. Then she remembered what her daughter had whispered to her. She asked her mother to remember to change her life in case of rebirth. She quickly got up from her seat and ran to her desk, where she had her notebook and found that it was October. Then she looked at herself in the mirror, and it was obvious that she had indeed been reborn and had gone back in time to that fall when she was still very young. It was October, and she was 19 years old. She was reborn before she finished her academy, after which she married Baron Harold. The girl belonged to the Viscountcy of Capliti. Her family was particularly rich and not at all from simple aristocratic families, but although their family had their own traditions, but unfortunately they had no history. The same could be said about the main character. She was not unusually beautiful, and also had nothing outstanding. But her parents loved her very much, and her friends appreciated her as a person. Later she was betrothed to Harold, the eldest son of a baron. But married life, as the woman suspected, did not turn out to be so interesting and exciting. Harold was an honest man. He lived according to his conscience and did not squander money. He loved their common daughter, and he was also a source of pride for his mother. Baroness did not know where else to find such a good spouse as her son was, because the other would surely have already had a mistress and would have gambled. So she constantly reproached the main character that the girl does not appreciate her husband, who was so kind, faithful, and courteous to her. But in fact, Harold was not a perfect husband. He was sorry for the jewelry for their daughter's dress, and also simple joys were unknown to him. Because of the fact that the protagonist and Harold were the same height, then she had to put on wedding shoes without heels in order not to humiliate his dignity. It would have been a boring life without much color. But there was something special about it. It was their daughter, who was born with a talent for magic. Of course, the talent was not unambiguous, but nevertheless, both the protagonist and her daughter were madly happy about it. But now I think and remember it all, the heroine could not accept that she is awake, and it is possible. She had all her memories with her. She remembered giving birth and raising her daughter. But now she was 19 again, and her body was pure and innocent. The protagonist realized that the dream could not be so believable. And now the words of her daughter, who asked her mother to do whatever she wanted after rebirth, caught up with the protagonist. She realized that she had returned to the past and it was not a dream after all. So now the girl was running down the corridors in a nightgown and calling for her mother, followed by her nanny, who asked the mistress to wait and put on at least a robe. But she was not going to stop. The girl kept running with tears in her eyes, remembering only one thing. Namely, that before her mother died, she never had time to say that she loved her. Sometime after the age of 70, her mom lost her hearing, so when the girl talked to her, she always got annoyed. But at the same time, the protagonist really didn't like being alone. Eventually, she got tired of talking to her mom and learned sign language to make it easier. But her mom got even more annoyed about it. That was the last time they saw each other, so now the heroine ran off to find her mother. But the nanny explained to the mistress that the mistress had gone to the garden to look at the flowers. Miss Rode was frightened to realize what the mistress was wearing and explained that she couldn't go into the study in her pajamas. But she didn't care. She opened the door and threw herself into her father's arms in tears. The girl's father, who had always been strict in her opinion, later fell ill with a weakness, and because of this, he was aging rapidly and began to act like a child. It hurt the girl to look at him, so now when the opportunity arose, she ran straight to the man. He hugged Riken and tried to understand what had happened to her and why his daughter was behaving so strangely. Then he turned to his friend who was in the hall and asked him to wait outside for a while. He immediately realized the strangeness of the situation and went away. But the girl recognized his name, so she immediately became embarrassed and calmed down. She realized that she had never been in such a situation before, because she had appeared in the most obscene way before this man, who was now with her father and was her first love. His name was Sturl Raft. Later, the nurse also came to the room and put Riken on the chair. Then the worried father began to ask what had happened to his daughter. The nurse also did not know the answer, because the lady had been acting a little strange since she woke up. Then, still crying, Riken explained that she wanted to see her father because she had had a terrible dream. The father was concerned that his daughter was acting like a child and asked the nanny if she was sure she had no pain. Then the nanny said that she would ask Dr. Norman to examine her. The father gently sat down to his daughter and apologized to her, for he had to leave as he had a very important conversation to have, but promised that he would surely return to his daughter at lunchtime. Riken agreed and asked that her father also tell Sir Sturl that she was terribly sorry that he had seen her in such a disgraceful state. Her father was initially surprised that she even knew the guy, but then he remembered that he had graduated from the academy last year, so he assumed that Riken had heard of him. The man also thought about the fact that since his daughter knew this guy, he was really an influential person. Even though Sir Sturl was the illegitimate son of the Raft family's daughter, everyone said that he had never once missed the first place in the academy. Riken, seeing the man's concern, explained to father that they didn't know each other personally, and the worried nanny explained to Riken that she should already be slowly packing and moving out to the academy. But she resolutely explained that she wasn't going anywhere today. She wanted to see her mom when she got back, so she asked if she could skip a day. The nanny was against it, but now that Riken was reborn and looking back on her life, studying at the academy didn't seem the most important thing. After all, the most important thing in the kingdom's academy was having a talent for magic. The girls enter the academy also because of magic, and their share is quite hard, because talent for magic is very rare. Magician girls with a rare talent could not attend places where boys were, But aristocrats who had no talent for magic were also forced to enter the academy. Ordinary girls did not want to receive the same education as boys, and talented girls dreamed of becoming great magicians. In addition, most girls didn't want to compete with boys, so the academy taught the girls who entered the academy art and etiquette to become noble ladies. So Riken always taught her daughter that studying was important and fun because then she could do what she wanted to do. But she also believed that attendance at the academy was not the most important thing. Riken's daughter had fewer restrictions than she did, so Riken always suspected that the girl might have been secretly skipping classes. But in any case, Riken had no intention or energy to go to the academy today, so when she returned to her room, she decided to sleep. When the girl's mother came in, she was able to calm down quickly because she was beginning to realize the reality she was in. Apparently, the Countess used all the flowers she had for her banquet, so Riken offered her mother an alternative. They could put the flowers not in large vases but in small jars. In that case, they could have enough flowers from the greenhouse for small bouquets. It seemed to Riken that buttercups, roses, and eucalyptus sprigs would be the best choice for this. Later, they could also add narcissus and jasmine. When Riken looked at the jar, her mother was very surprised because it looked much better than she had originally imagined, and she had not even realized that her daughter had such a talent. But it wasn't surprising, because Riken had been a married woman for 20 years. The woman smiled and began to ask Riken what problems she was having, but she smiled and explained that everything was fine and she just wanted to talk to her mother. But she only laughed because she remembered how her daughter had sworn that she wouldn't talk to her anymore because Riken didn't like her mother's nagging and she had been silent for a long time. But the girl smiled and explained to her mother that she just wanted to talk to her for a while because they hadn't talked for a long time. And then they hugged. It was true. The girl hadn't talked to her mother in a long time. She had something she wanted to do more than anything. And since she had been reborn, she wished to be kind to her parents so that she would not regret her actions in the future. Before pessimism and hardship filled Riken's life, she had the desire to say that she loved her parents and hug them tightly. And even in the future, when her memories became cloudy, she wanted to be sure of their feelings for each other so that she would never forget her parents. She had already made a lot of small but important changes in her life after coming back to the past. After her fight with Pauline, with whom she had stopped communicating, she was no longer angry with the girl, and they had made up. She also chose a different dress for the graduation banquet. She changed it to a satin purple dress with jewelry, but all of Riken's friends and personal maids were against this change. But even they, when they saw Riken in that dress, could not help but recognize how well it suited her. Third, every morning, Riken told her family that she loved them, even to her brother Mikael, who didn't understand this strange behavior from her sister, who had never done it before. But even after the rebirth, Riken did not become a great person in an instant. She still had an ordinary face, a family, intelligence, and talent. So she knew that soon her father would introduce her to Gerald, whom he considered a suitable spouse, and she would marry again and live as before. But in any case, Riken was not going to accept this fate. She had already decided that she would change everything in her life, so she hoped that she would be able to cope with this task. In time, Riken also realized why her daughter said that Riken did not have to give birth to her. If she was reborn, she would not be able to change her life dramatically until she became a completely different person, even though she was reborn. But this girl was a different person, because she was still to Riken her beloved and precious daughter and family. Her daughter was to Riken her whole world, so they were bound to meet again. This time, Riken decided to continue with her painting because she was happy with everything, but she had one special wish. But suddenly a friend came up and asked Riken if she had chosen a prom partner. It was Deborah, and Riken explained that she was thinking of going to prom with her father. Deborah asked that Riken not be so boring and told her that she wanted to go to her prom with Lawrence. In her past life, Riken would have been jealous when she heard about the girl's partner, but knowing the future, she didn't want to be jealous anymore. Lawrence, until he was 50 years old, could not stop looking at girls who were a little younger than 20, so Riken advised her friend not to stray far from her companion. Deborah didn't understand why her friend started talking like her aunt and wondered why Riken didn't have a boyfriend she liked. And Deborah didn't even know who could potentially be her partner. But Riken calmly explained that she thought her father would make the decision, but Deborah thought there was nothing wrong with dating someone. If she was lucky, she could meet a good man and become his wife, or she could even meet her destiny. Looking at her friend so happy, Riken awkwardly thought about the fact that she had never had such a chance before and didn't know what to expect now. When it was time to leave, it was raining outside, and Riken waited for Penny, but she never came. Riken realized that if she went to the wagon while it was raining and she didn't have an umbrella, she wouldn't be able to wear the dress again. It would be ruined, so she had to wait. But she was not upset, for now there was a fresh and warm smell of rain outside. She liked this weather, for Riken immediately began to remember her past. But suddenly she heard footsteps and turned to see who had come. It was Sir Sturl, who looked very excited when he saw Lady Capland. At the sight of him, Riken immediately began to worry, because this man had definitely seen her in those ridiculous pajamas. She didn't even know how to address the guy, but he calmly explained that the girl could call him by his first name, Sturl. At first, the guy thought that Riken didn't know his name, but she calmly curtsied and introduced herself, letting the guy know that she had heard of him. She also explained that their first meeting had been rather awkward, and she apologized to the guy for appearing in such a ridiculous way. But Sturl explained that Riken had nothing to apologize for, especially since even her father appeared very excited. Riken was very pleased that the young man was so concerned about her father, but explained that it was no big deal. Finally, they both continued to stand in the rain, and looking at Sturl, Riken realized that the Mage Tower was in the academy, so it was not surprising that she had crossed paths with Sir Sturl. He was a genius, but not many people knew that at the time, because no one knew how powerful he was. He had two elements at once, water and wind. The world wouldn't find out until 2 years later when it was revealed that his father was king. Till then, he's the grim son and grandson of the Marquis, but not an aristocrat. However, after the queen's death, the king will officially marry his mother, and then Sturl will take his father's surname. A son born illegitimately cannot inherit the throne, so the king will give him the title of duke with the queen's consent. In any case, Riken knew she'd never get a guy like that, so she didn't expect anything. Besides, Sturl was my first love from a long time ago. When Rikens and her daughter had an interesting conversation, she never really thought about the words she said. But now it was different. But Riken realized that now Sturl was very young, he was completely different from the duke he would become in the future. But the duke, whom Riken always looked at from afar, was very attractive, even though he was older than Riken, so they were never in the same company. Still, the girl's heart fluttered at the mere sight of him. Now before her was a guy who was completely different from the image she remembered so well. But he always had a soft, calm demeanor, and he always had a rather cold atmosphere around him. Sturl was not at all different from that time. It was as if Riken was back in her memories again. But suddenly, while she was dreamily thinking about what was going on, Sturl approached her and asked her if she had an umbrella. He suspected that she kept standing there waiting for someone because she was afraid of getting wet. The girl explained that the problem was her dress, because if she got it wet, it would get ruined. Riken explained that if she waited a bit, she would be met by a maid who knew that Riken usually came back at this time. Then, Sturl wondered if the girl was cold. She explained that it was chilly, but nothing critical, and if she was cold, she would go to the workshop. But he didn't know about the workshop. So Riken told him that the workshop was in the main building, and that they usually painted there. He was no less surprised because he had never heard of a painting group. Riken was somehow pleased that Sturl knew about it, but she knew that there were no people at the art exhibitions. But he explained that he was among the few people who came to the exhibitions, and explained that the reason for the low attendance was that there were no people at the academy who were interested in drawing. Riken picked up this conversation and explained that most people like to be famous. Those who study stood out due to their studies and try to show themselves in every way, especially if they have magic. All magic wants to climb to the top. Riken thought that drawing was a hobby for shy people like her who had a lot of free time. She only awkwardly remembered how she had shown up at her father's house in her pajamas and realized that it must have given her the wrong impression. Suddenly, the girl sneezed and apologized. Despite this, Sturl started looking at her strangely. Then he apologized fearfully, for he had forgotten his manners, for it was raining and also cold. She tried to explain that she was all right, but Sturl held out his hand and explained that if the lady would let him, he would like to lead her to the carriage. The excited Riken did not understand why Sturl was standing next to her, for she thought he had no umbrella either. But with a simple wave of his hand, he began to cast a spell in the air, creating a dome that would protect her from the rain. Afterwards, Sturl asked if the girl knew anything about magic. She explained that she didn't know much and had only heard about it. In fact, it was not true, because Riken knew enough, because her daughter studied magic at the academy and was always proud to talk about it. But if Riken had told the boy about it, she probably wouldn't have been able to explain her knowledge. Sturl explained that because he was a wind mage, he could easily manage the weather on days like this. And holding out his hand, the man offered his help. Riken wondered if she could accept his kindness. As far as she knew, the Duke was a rather cold-blooded man. He never treated anyone coldly, but never showed interest in anyone. Also, he was not the kind of man who would use magic and escort a strange girl he met for the first time. So now Riken realized that it was really a great luck. She accepted the man's help and thought excitedly that by going back in time, she had been able to make a difference. Sturl explained that this was because he could also control water. So he drained the earth so that the dress would survive. And then smiling, Riken explained that it was just incredible. The guy was surprised that Riken looked like she didn't see anything amazing, but she explained that she was still surprised. She felt as if she was inside the magic, though she probably was. But suddenly, while they were walking quietly, Riken heard the excited yowl of her maid, who was already running with an umbrella. But smiling calmly, Riken explained that everything was fine. She had reached the carriage without getting wet. Riken also turned around and thanked Sir Sturl for seeing her off. She did so, thinking all the time that she had a new memory connected with Sturl, which seemed to her a great luck, because later she would be able to tell her daughter about it. She remembered that the girl had asked her mother to confess her sympathy to her first love, for no one knew what might have happened, and perhaps they would have succeeded. But Riken realized that her daughter's wish would never come true, because Sturl was the future Duke, and also her first love. Despite understanding the difference in their statuses, the girl's heart was beating frantically at the mere thought of him. And even if Riken had the courage to confess her feelings to him, the world would not change so easily, and therefore they could not be together. She called out to the young man, who immediately turned around, waiting for the girl's words. Riken begged herself to be brave, for she wanted to be the person who could break anything with just her courage, not the person who couldn't say a word and constantly made excuses for herself. Previously, Riken had constantly justified her fearfulness by saying that Sturl was a man she wasn't worthy of, so now the embarrassed girl asked the guy if he wanted to be her partner at next year's graduation, if he was still available. Initially, Sir Sturl was madly surprised by such a request, but sincerely smiling, he explained to the girl that if her father would not mind it, he would gladly become her partner. Initially, Riken did not know how to react, because she did not expect the consent of the guy, but after just shocked, smiled and embarrassed. She was furious that Riken had decided to make Sir Sturl her partner at the ball, because she thought that Riken had not thought with her head when she had chosen this boy, because he was an illegitimate son, and this man was not suitable for her daughter. The woman didn't understand her daughter's behavior lately, because the girl had always been decent and didn't go to extremes, following her position in society. It was obvious to Riken that her mother would be against it, because she cared for her well-being. And Sturl is the illegitimate son of the Marquis. An illegitimate child is a symbol of immorality and a stain on his parents' reputation. Even though he was born into a noble family, Sturl cannot inherit his parents' title. No matter how great a caretaker of the Tower of Mages he may be, he will always remain an illegitimate child first and foremost. It was so bad that it would have been easier for Sturl to have been born a commoner, and then his talent for magic would have been recognized much easier. He would have also been able to get a new title, a new family name, and he would have been able to start his new family. But he was the least lucky to be born, and was born with the status of an illegitimate son of noble aristocrats. The whole world knew his name and could not hide his family's origins. The Marquis Raft noble family that followed right after the imperial family. Just 100 years ago, the Rafts were the ruling family of the independent state. Now their status is also different from the other two Marquis families that were part of the empire. It all has to do with Sturl, so it is a huge obstacle to his marriage. No matter how many girls he charmed, there were never any rumors of a wedding. But still, Riken stood up for Sturl and explained to her mother that she had asked him for this favor, and asked that her mother not blame the guy. The woman was worried about her daughter because she had never been accompanied by anyone other than her father and grandfather before. But worried, Riken explained to her mother that she need not worry, for Sir Sturl could take no interest in her. He was only doing her a favor. She promised her mother that it was just a graduation party, and she hadn't even asked to be his consort. Then the mother realized that she was really wrong, and her daughter was thinking and talking like an adult, so she stopped worrying so much and hugged the girl. And then Riken hugged her mother again and convinced her that she had nothing to worry about, because even if she was interested in the guy, he would never reciprocate. Then the girl's mother wanted to send Sir Sturl a letter, not because she didn't trust her daughter, but rather because she expected the guy to be scared. The woman was worried about her daughter's decision. She could understand that her daughter really wanted to remember her prom, but she didn't understand if Riken was worried that it would be too boring to go to the prom accompanied by family members. As Riken laughed, she realized that she apparently didn't inspire confidence in her mother at all. But the woman reassured her daughter by explaining that she knew that Riken was a kind, confident girl, and she also knew that her daughter would never go out with anyone without her family's permission. Then suddenly, a question arose in the girl's mind, and she asked her mother if she wanted her prom to be memorable for the rest of her life. It was, and the woman wanted her prom to be special. So she went with Riken's father. The girl marveled at how lucky her parents were to meet each other and share a memory. And then laughing, her mother explained that she had even disobeyed her father to go to the prom with the girl's father. Then thinking about it, Riken realized that her marriage to Gerald was inevitable. She really wanted Gerald to be a different person, but alas, one does not often find such happy couples as her parents. Riken and Gerald's family was without feeling, without any emotion. But that was not the only problem. But now Riken intended to live a much better life, because now she already knew Gerald well. She was asking for permission to go to the ball with Sturl, but she was still thinking about her future husband, with whom she had not even made any arrangements yet. So Riken decided to forget about the herald for a while and just enjoy her splendid adolescence. Later, Riken went to her room, and Penny suggested that Mistress Norman give her some medicine from Dr. Norman to calm her anxiety, because she couldn't write a letter to the man. But Riken asked the maid not to worry so much, because she wasn't so serious about Sturl, and all she wanted was to go to the ball with him. Penny explained that she already knew the man very well, because she had walked with her mistress through the garden to meet him. An insanely awkward Riken explained that it was just a coincidence, and she only wanted to go to the prom with him. But Penny began to remember their encounter, when Rachel had walked with her boyfriend in the rain. Penny honestly confessed that she was very surprised to see the lady walking with a man, and then she was so scared that she wanted to run to save them. She was also delighted that Sir Sturl had used so much magic just to keep the dress from getting wet, which seemed delightful to her. Riken tried to explain that he had a lot of magic, and it was nothing special. But Penny thought the girl was too pessimistic, for if Riken really didn't like Sturl, he wouldn't have decided to escort her, nor would he have agreed to be her partner. From such thoughts, Riken was very embarrassed, but asked Penny not to tell anyone about her guesses, because after the ball she would never meet Sturl again. And in Soviet society, the most interesting thing is the rumors about who is dating and who is marrying whom. So even after 2 innocent dances, different stories can already spread. Penny knew about it, so she promised to keep quiet, but she also noticed that Riken had some free time lately, and she started laughing a lot and acting boldly. Penny had longed to see Mistress happy. One day, Penny suddenly quit her job and left the palace to marry a man 8 years older than her. Later, Riken learned through her nanny that Penny had gotten married in a hurry because she was pregnant. And thinking about it, Riken explained that her parents would choose her future husband, but she wanted Penny to know who she had chosen. She also asked Penny to tell her if she would have a lover, and Riken asked her to tell her if she had any problems, because Riken cared about the girl and wanted to help her if Penny was in a difficult situation. Penny did not suspect that the mistress thought about her in such a way, so she was very touched. But Riken herself was not surprised, because Penny was her trusted person. So if she suddenly got married and left her, Riken would be very upset. Later, the girl still finished the letter and addressed the esteemed Sulfur Sturl. Riken explained that she remembered with warmth the time when her boyfriend helped her, because she was very grateful to him. And she was also grateful that he accepted her crazy proposal. She explained her mother had given her permission, so when the time came she looked forward to Sturl's visit and promised to make warm tea for him. When this letter was received by Sturl, he read it carefully and noticed that the girl had also put flower petals in the letter. He immediately used water and air magic on them, which lifted the petals into the air and spun them around the room. And then the smell of lavender spread around the room. The boy was immediately approached by his friend, who realized that it was a letter from a girl, and such letters were always written by unmarried ladies. But he was surprised that anyone wrote to Sturl, because it always seemed to him that Sturl was not interested in girls. It also seemed to him that Sir Sturl didn't even recognize women's faces, except for his mother and cousin. Sturl didn't understand why the boy was talking such nonsense, but his friend explained that every time he was shedding bitter tears, as soon as he remembered all those girls who had been rejected by Sturl, because he did not even look at the young heiress of the family of one count, and one pretended as if he did not know the daughter of Earl Wayne, who was the first beauty of the aristocratic world. Sturl only calmly explained that he did not pretend and really did not know her, because all he knew was what the daughter of Earl Wayne looked like. But however, he had never heard what kind of person she was, and all he knew was that there was some young girl who was going crazy because of him. Sturl knows well how ill-considered feelings can ruin a life. But the friend thought that Sturl shouldn't have rejected the girl so coldly. And he even remembered that after this incident, rumors began to circulate that if Sturl was a water mage, his soul was also cold. But Sturl knew that the soul had nothing to do with magic. He explained that there was nothing special about the letter, and that he had simply arranged to escort the Kaplan family's daughter to the graduation ceremony. Sturl looked at the letter for a long time, and noticed that Riken's handwriting was very neat. She had written the letter with only important details, and even if the 19-year-old girl had an interest in him, Riken did not express it. There was no hint of anxiety in the letter. Sturl was also pleased that the Viscount's wife had allowed to act as an escort for her daughter. But friend still couldn't understand how it was possible that Sturl would accompany the Viscount's daughter. But the problem was not even in whose daughter she was, because the guy knew personally the main beauty of the society, which Sturl refused. But he thought that in Riken was nothing special. She was very simple and unremarkable, so he was sure that he at Sturl has changed his taste in girls. Sturl explained to his friend that he shouldn't be so dramatic, as he would only keep her company for once. But even from these explanations, he didn't have less questions. And he wanted to know when Sturl started taking part in banquets and why he was so attracted to this lady. The reason was that Sturl could not refuse and offend Riken, who had the courage to invite him. There must always be some reason for refusal. The friend realized that in spite of his coldness, it was probably the lady who was interested in him, however much he wanted to hide it. Then, seriously angry, Sturl reminded that in 3 days he had to present a project on stabilizing the world climate, and asked if Gerald had already solved the problem with the boomerang effect. Then Gerald immediately realized that if he didn't leave now, Sturl would give him more work. So he silently went away to think about the project in the morning. On the day of the meeting between Riken and Sturl, the girl woke up and almost didn't sleep during the night because of the intense excitement. But nevertheless, she had to look good today and be awake in order not to embarrass herself. Penny appeared in the room immediately holding a tray of red fish. She explained that it was the Baroness's advice that the fish would be quite invigorating, and she wanted to put it on her mistress's face. But Riken knew that red fish would have no effect even if she put it under her eyes. Besides, she didn't want to smell blood. Penny realized her mistake, but Riken thanked her for her trouble and asked her to take the fish to the kitchen. She also remembered that she had asked the butler to leave the honey to melt, so she asked her to bring it. As soon as Penny left, Riken started to look at herself. Even without the honey, she didn't have a single wrinkle on her face, so she thought that youth was a really beautiful time. And even though she didn't have much to look at now, This time, Riken decided to start taking care of herself from a young age. Even if she wasn't the first beauty now, in 10 or 20 years, she would look younger than others. For some reason, Riken also liked very nice dresses when she was young. Because of the lace on all the clothes, her hair also had to be done luxuriously. And now, these clothes seemed a bit rustic to her. After all her years, Riken wanted to look softer and more defenseless, so she decided to choose a less flashy outfit. By then, Penny had just brought honey and was asking how else she could help Mistress. Then, handing her the dress, Riken asked the maid to remove the lace on the collar. Riken happily agreed, for she felt it was her duty. She had seen Mistress's anxiety before her meeting with Sturl, so she agreed to help. But looking at the lace, she realized that it was unlikely that she would be able to do it perfectly, and at least it would take some time. After Riken had received the maid's explanation, she asked Penny to go to her mother's house and get a handkerchief to cover the lace, and then together they would put honey on her face. Penny excitedly explained that the honey was too precious. But Riken didn't see that as a problem, because her house wouldn't go bankrupt if they put 1 spoonful of honey on Penny's face. So Riken asked Penny to get a handkerchief while she prepared the honey. This mask required 2 spoonfuls of honey mixed with fresh wine. In her past life, Riken had often applied this mixture to her face with her daughter. But as soon as they applied this mask, the daughter would always fall asleep. So Riken would wipe the honey off her face while the girl slept. And now thinking back on all these moments, Riken missed her daughter very much. She would have loved to repeat those moments. Instead of borrowing a handkerchief, the mother sent a box with a new one in it. Though she was surprised that her daughter was so stressed out just because she wished she could decorate her dress. Riken explained that her dress was too heavily decorated with different ruffles, and she wanted to fix the dress afterward and make it into a summer outfit. Looking over her daughter, the woman realized that it was a really good idea. She also liked the way the girl's outfit looked. Even though it looked a little old-fashioned, it suited her very well. She also liked the girl's hairstyle, namely the high bun. After all, when the Viscountess was young, it was fashionable to have her hair styled that way. The Viscountess also took a small blue brooch with a precious stone and began to pin it to her chest. She explained that before the wedding, Riken's father had given her this ring, which now acted as a brooch, but the Viscountess had no occasion to wear it lately, so she wanted Riken to have it. Riken smiled happily and promised that she would keep the ring to pass it on to her daughter. The woman laughed, for the ring was not a piece of jewelry to be passed down from generation to generation. But she looked happily at her daughter and explained that she was a real beauty. But they were disturbed by the butler, who explained to the lady that the guest had arrived. When she came down, she immediately saw Sturl, who excitedly greeted Lady Riken and even prepared for her a bouquet of flowers, which she handed to the girl as a small gift in honor of their meeting. Looking at the bouquet, Riken couldn't believe that it was the day when she received flowers from her first love. Noticing her attentive gaze, Sturl was worried that Riken didn't like the flowers. But she convinced him otherwise and asked him to come to the house since everything was ready. Then he gently offered his elbow to Riken, which she took, and together they walked through the house and into the room that used to be used for music lessons. Riken explained to the guest that now there were no people in their house who played musical instruments, so they used this room for small tea ceremonies. While they were waiting for tea, she also told him that if they opened all the windows, they could see the beautiful garden, and she thought that if it was a warmer day, this room would be a better place for tea. When she looked out the windows, Sturl recognized the ginkgo trees immediately. Riken was amazed at Sturl's knowledge and explained that her mother had planted them. Although she knew that they didn't have a very unique garden compared to others, but they had many trees, and the leaves fall differently and look different. So when she was walking in the garden and leaves were falling from the trees, it looked very romantic. Looking at the falling leaves, Sturl began to understand what she was talking about, because at least walking on the autumn leaves was much more pleasant than walking on the stone road. Then Riken asked the maid to bring her a glass vase for her flowers, and again explained to Sturl that it was a little harsh to invite the boy to her ball, but she was still grateful that he had agreed. These words seemed to hurt the young man. He did not think that Riken could bring him any inconvenience and thought on the contrary. In fact, Riken even had to forgive her mother's permission to invite him. The guy admitted that he had originally thought that Riken had invited him because she was in some ignorance and did not know who he was. So, he had counted on Riken not contacting him or sending a letter of apology. Riken immediately remembered his story. Even among the others, Sturl was different from the illegitimate children of other aristocrats. When his mother was abandoned by the man who was supposed to marry her, she was already pregnant. Everyone was pointing fingers at her for having a child out of wedlock. She was a small fish in an ocean of predators. But now, Riken calmly explained that neither Sturl nor his mother had any reason to worry about her invitation, so she hoped that in the future, they would be more relaxed about it. Then, smiling, Sturl apologized for what he had said earlier and explained that he didn't really have many people who stayed with him despite his situation, for which he was very grateful. When she noticed her displaced mistress, she immediately wanted to leave, explaining that she had brought a vase, but the atmosphere was spoiled and Riken awkwardly explained to Penny that everything was fine and invited her in. Then, looking over her bouquet before placing it in the vase, Riken wondered why Sturl had bought the names of asters and not other flowers, since they weren't often used for bouquets. The reason was simple. Sturl liked these flowers and was worried that Riken didn't like them. She explained that she liked asters the best because they were simple but beautiful and different from the luxurious roses and lilies. So she wanted to put this bouquet in her room as a decoration. After all, they were simply beautiful, so they would be a nice addition to her room. She also explained that, for now, the flowers would stand without water, but later she would fill the vase with water. Sturl was immediately interested in this and started asking about the water she uses for the flowers, and whether she should add anything to it. Riken began to say that sometimes sugar is added to the water, or a copper coin. When Riken noticed sugar on the table, he began to use water magic, filling the vase with water and explaining that the flowers would not fade. Riken was delighted to see such beauty. It was the first time she heard the sound of Sturl's spells. After all, she had only heard her daughter's spell sounds before, and those sounds were like the sounds of a xylophone. Riken thanked the man for his help and said that it was the second time she had seen Sturl's magic, but she was still amazed as if it was the first time. Sturl began to explain that there was nothing special about this magic because water mages learned such spells at the first stage. Riken still thought that his skills were of a very high level, so much so that it seemed unbelievable. Trying to hide his embarrassment, Sturl admitted that it was not easy to maintain the magic for a long time, but it was not very difficult. Just at that moment, a maid appeared and brought what the lady had asked her to bring. It was a different pattern of dresses, and looking at them, Sturl was surprised that the girl's dress would be purple in color. Sturl was far from Soviet society, but it seemed to him that they usually wore brightly colored clothes to such events. Riken explained that the reason for her choice was that the color red did not suit her, so she wanted to choose something that really suited her and not what was in fashion. She then handed over the tie as a thank you and explained that it was her gift, so she hoped it wouldn't burden the man. The reason for choosing this particular tie was that one had prepared a suit of a delicate color, so she thought there would be no problem if his suit was complemented by this tie. She hoped that if Sturl decided to accept her invitation, he would also accept this small gift. Looking at the velvet tie, Sturl realized that he had accepted not only the invitation, but also the small gift, and that should have been the end of it. But he turned to Riken with a smile and explained that since she had chosen the tie for him, he had hoped to get help in making cufflinks for his suit, as he had nothing suitable for the girl's dress, and showed her his silver cufflinks. Riken realized that they were cufflinks for a casual outfit. Sturl explained that the reason was that he had never had an occasion to wear a tailcoat, and especially not often in public, but he knew that if he wore something too simple, it would be against etiquette. Especially, he was worried that this detail of his costume would not match the girl's outfit. Then the embarrassed girl realized that it looked like an invitation for another meeting and thought about her answer. As she pondered, Sturl began to worry that maybe it would be a problem for the girl. But she convinced him otherwise and embarrassedly explained that she would be happy to help him with his choice. That was the end of their meeting. Riken was still thinking about the fact that she had promised Sturl that she would meet him. It seemed that she could easily get through the meeting by covering her concerns about etiquette. But if they met again, the story would be different. She realized that no matter how many times they met, it could hardly be called a great deal of progress. For after all, Sturl felt it was his duty to accept her invitation to the prom. But the girl still didn't understand what she should do with the herald. She was sad to realize that she could not change her husband, because whatever she did, and no matter how close she got to Sturl, it would all be for nothing, and they would just have one more meeting, after which they would be separated. Riken also missed her daughter very much, and thought about her promise to try to change things. At the academy, Riken's friend found out that she was going to the prom with Sturl and that they had a date. Riken asked that Mariah be a little quieter, but the girl herself was surprised that her friend's behavior had been so harshly apologetic. She explained that if she had heard the news from any other person, she would have been surprised. But to hear the news that her friend Riken had decided to go on a date to the prom with Sturl seemed unbelievable to her. Riken understood why all her friends and family thought her changes were unbelievable, because not so long ago she had been quiet and unassuming, always reserved, and not so long ago all she thought about was marrying whoever her father chose for her. But still calmed down, she explained to Maria that she would not have a date with Sturl, and they would just buy the necessary things for the banquet. Maria explained that the cufflinks for the banquet were not just a trinket, but Maria was worried about how everything had happened. Everything was changing too fast, and she was worried that Riken was going out with just the two of them, because her mother would never have allowed them to be alone and unaccompanied. Riken explained that she would indeed be accompanied by her nanny, so it was all right. And then, listening to her friend Maria suspected that Sir Sturl might like her. Riken thought it was impossible. After all, they had only seen each other a couple of times. But then Maria began to reason logically. She accepted the possibility that Sturl could not refuse Riken's request because he was friends with her father. But in that case, his offer to see her again did not fit that explanation. She also suspected that when it was just the two of them, the atmosphere between them wasn't so bad. And Riken confirmed it, trying to understand what it was about and why Maria had suddenly brought it up. But she was glad that her friend was finally happy and had found a boyfriend. Riken was sad because it was very hard for her, because 2 months after graduation, she would meet Gerald. Of course, dating other guys before marriage was not strange, but her case was different. Just then, Pauline arrived and noticed Riken's brooding and wondered what they were talking about. She told Pauline that her friend was going to the prom with Sir Sturl, and Pauline, shocked, screamed in disbelief, and Riken asked the girls to be quiet. But it was too late, for their conversation was overheard by Earl Wayne's daughter, who called out to Lady Riken. Pauline and Maria were immediately frightened, not knowing what to do, and excitedly apologized for having attracted their attention. Looking at the girl, Riken remembered that she had liked the lady a lot before, as she had always seemed very beautiful, confident, and mature. But now she felt as if she was just trying to be an adult, and even compared to Riken's daughter, Lady Wayne was like a child. As soon as Lady Wayne came over, she immediately started to find out why Riken was laughing in the company of her friends. Riken explained that she was surprised that the lady had shown interest in her for the first time, for though they were the same age, they had never had anything to do with each other before, so Riken was glad that they could talk so easily. The girl explained that her attention was due to the recent talk about Sir Sturl, and she was interested to hear about it. Riken explained that her father had been friends with Sir Sturl, so he had decided to escort her to the prom. Riken told everything honestly, considering it the wisest decision to get out of this situation. After all, she knew that as much as the lady did not express her feelings for Sturl, the guy completely ignored her, and it was a well-known story among people. After listening to Riken's story, the lady explained that Riken had always been very kind and cautious, so the girl thought that she would surely not be a hindrance in Sturl's way, and asked that Riken should remember forever the honor and grace that Sturl had shown her by agreeing to go to the prom with her. As soon as Lady Wayne was gone, the girls breathed a sigh of relief. But Pauline immediately noticed a crystal bird flying toward them through the window, which landed in Riken's arms and addressed her. Looking at the bird, Riken immediately realized that it belonged to Sturl, and that he was able to communicate with her from a distance with the help of this bird. Riken also knew that this bird was called the Madogu bird. Sturl was again amazed at how well the girl knew magic, but she explained that she only knew the base and had never seen such outstanding magic in person. and she had never met such amazing magicians. Sturl was a little embarrassed by such a compliment and smiled, thanking the girl, then asked if her classes were over. She explained that she would be leaving the academy soon. The excited girl explained that they could meet at the main hall so that he wouldn't have to go to her. But he was against it because he walked much faster than Riken, so he asked her to wait, especially since he thought it was rude to make a girl walk a lot. Maria and Pauline, who had heard the conversation, were jealous of what was going on with their friend because it seemed very exciting to them. But the awkward Riken explained that they were only going to choose cufflinks for Sturl and nothing more. She said goodbye to her friends and wanted to leave, but as she was leaving the building, she noticed the maddeningly disgruntled face of the lady who had been watching her from afar the whole time and had probably heard their conversation. Riken immediately began to think whether everything would be all right with Sturl, and you were worried, because such anger on the part of the lady did not mean anything good, and she would not want to cause unnecessary problems. Also, the girl was worried about the pain in her foot because she put on a high heel, which in addition was thin. In these shoes, it was hard to walk without an escort, so she had not worn them before, and she realized how stupid it was to choose these shoes, because she had not been a child for a long time, but still stubbornly insisted on these shoes. But then a young man smilingly appeared in front of her and greeted Riken and asked her to hand her the books so that he could carry them. Riken didn't want to bother the young man, but he took the books and thought it would be better to carry the heavy things instead of the girl, especially since even though the books were thin, their combined weight was quite substantial. Sturl also looked around, but did not see a maid, and asked if someone was coming to escort Riken, as she had said that a maid should come to fetch her. Riken explained that this time a maid would come to her, but there were too many people here, so perhaps she couldn't find them and was probably waiting for them in the carriage. Then, holding out his hand to Riken, one of them decided to escort her to the carriage so that they could go to her guardian. When she accepted such an invitation, the embarrassed Riken reflected on how strong her heart fluttered, even though they had only been together for a short time. When Riken had married Gerald, she had also been excited, but it was because of the anticipation of the future that was in store for them. But this time her heart was beating so fast for a different reason. Also, even though Riken was wearing high heels, Sturl was still much taller than her. But noticing her thoughts, Riken realized how stupid she had been. After all, worrying that she could truly fall in love with a young man. As they approached the carriage, Riken immediately introduced Nanny and Sturl to each other. But all of us were immediately aware of Miss Rhodes' wariness towards the young man, despite the fact that Sturl behaved politely and even thanked the nanny for her help. On the road today, despite the tension, the two young people started talking. The girl was wondering where they were going, but Sturl decided to make it a little surprise. Looking at the road, Riken had no idea where they were going, but she knew they were not on their way to the jewelry store. As soon as the carriage stopped, Sturl got out first and explained to the coachman that they had arrived at the right place. Then, he gave Riken his hand and led her outside. As soon as she got out, she immediately smelled the familiar smell of paint and realized where she was. It was Enzola Street. Riken remembered that they had come to pick out cufflinks, but Sturl explained that he remembered their conversation about the painting circle, so he had decided to bring Riken here. But he was worried that she might not want to go shopping, so he suggested she go back to the jewelry store. But Riken smiled again as she looked around and honestly confessed that she had wanted to come to this place for a long time. It was the place she had dreamed about in her dreams. It was the place where all the artists of the continent came to store, but she had never been here, because it was not a place she should go alone, so the butler usually bought her everything she needed to paint. When Sturl heard about it, he decided that since they had already come here, it would be good for Riken to choose something suitable for herself, and she was delighted with the idea. Then, looking at the smiling face of the girl, the boy was completely blown away by her beauty. Riken came to the nanny and began to explain where they had come and why, and also explained that if the nanny did not want to go shopping, she should have stayed in the carriage. But the nanny knew that this would be wrong, and explained to the lady that such behavior for a young lady was not allowed. Looking from the side at what was going on, Sturl thought with a smile that earlier he thought it would be better to clarify all the details with Riken in advance, but he was very glad that she liked his idea. But seeing how hard it was for her to make arrangements with the babysitter, Sturl decided to get permission next time and warn her about everything. But suddenly, he realized that he began to think about their next date, as if it were a matter of course. But it was not strange because it was the first time Sturl felt so calm and relaxed in someone's company. When Riken asked him why he was smiling, Sturl sincerely admitted that he was glad to be with Riken, and he thought that the girl had the ability to make people around her feel very comfortable. As soon as they entered the store, the young man immediately recognized Sir Sturl and noticed that this time he was accompanied by a lovely lady, so she asked him why they had come. After explaining that they wanted paint, Sturl introduced the young man to Riken. His name was Kartal, and he was the owner of the store. It was an honor for the two young people to get to know each other, and Riken admired how many beautiful paintings he had in his store. Kartal thanked him for the nice compliment and explained to the girl that most of the paintings on display were by young artists, and aristocrats who usually seek masterpieces of masters do not perceive such style of painting. But looking at them, Riken was really impressed, and seeing her admiration, the shopkeeper offered to go upstairs to show her some paintings and also to go to the materials. In the Kartal's shop, the heroine could find blue dye that comes across the sea from the south, and charcoal pencil that comes from another principality that was in the very north. But the man also told her that the pencils were actually made there, but they were made of wood that came from another principality, and that was their secret. Then they began to laugh merrily and discuss other fine arts, and looking around them, Sturl was satisfied that he had managed to make the girl happy, and it meant that his mission had been a success. When Riken gave his hand, they started to go upstairs with her, and the nanny looking at them reflected on the fact that earlier she had been very interested in whom their mistress was so interested in, and was a little upset that this person turned out to be Sturl. Even though he was the grandson of the Marquis of Raft, he was still a bastard son, so Nanny could not understand why the master and mistress had allowed them to meet. This thought could not leave her mind, although it was obvious that the girl looked very happy in the company of the young man. When they got to the second floor, a delighted Riken began to look at the new tools and canvases that shone in the light of the afternoon sun. Riken turned to Sturl and asked him if he had ever painted or sculpted, but he had never done any of those things, although he often came to the store to look at the paintings, which were located mostly on the first floor. That was how he became interested in art. He also said that he originally started coming here because of his magic, because among practicing water mages, there are those who are unable to recognize their power if they have more than one stream of water. So if you add paint to one of these streams in advance, it will be easier to distinguish them. But the shopkeeper reminded the boy that he was also interested in painting, because not long ago he had come to buy a sketchbook and pencils. Embarrassed, Sturl explained that he wanted to make some sketches. Riken asked to see them, and the embarrassed guy explained that he didn't have any talent. But he thought that if Lady went to an art class, she was good at drawing, so he asked her to show her paintings, and she awkwardly explained that she wasn't very confident in her work. But by then, having poured the tea, the shopkeeper explained that the two of them shouldn't worry. In addition, he explained to Sturl that if they captured on canvas the streams of water that appeared when using magic, then surely people would line up to buy these paintings. But a disgruntled Sturl explained that it would not be a painting, because it was just a random mixing of colors without any intention. Therefore, it could not be considered art. The owner then pointed out that Sturl knew very well the philosophy of painting, despite the fact that he said he was not interested in painting. And Sturl immediately realized that he had been skillfully tricked. But eventually, after a while of tea, they went on shopping, and Sturl wanted to look at some violet paints to see how the color would interact with water. Then the girl discovered that the young man was holding cufflinks without jewels. He explained that instead of jewels, he had put magic stones in the cufflinks. A magic stone is a wizard's main magical tool. Magic stones also hold the wizard's mana. It works in different ways. Usually they use things from which they can immediately extract mana. Riken's daughter also created such a magical tool out of a pocket watch, but she didn't use it much because there wasn't much mana in it. The man then provided them with several shades of purple paint they had, and also water so they could mix it all up. Riken also asked for brushes and paper, which she would later buy back. The man then immediately agreed. Sturl explained that he had previously wanted to buy Riken brushes as a gift, but she explained that she had to choose and buy such things herself. After all, she had never personally chosen the materials before. When Riken started painting, she liked one of the colors better than the others. The paint was clearer than amethysts and brighter than purple jade. She thought that if she searched, she could even find jewels of a similar color. Riken explained to the young man that the paint changes color when mixed with water, so she had no idea which of these paints would be good for creating magical stones. Sturl wanted to show the girl how to do it, but there weren't enough materials for that because there was a lot of pure water needed. So he suggested that Riken come to the Mage's Tower tomorrow to tell and show her everything. But suddenly, the girl remembered about the bird, so she gave it to the young man, but he refused and explained that it would be a gift for Riken because the bird was made of crystal, so she could use it as a piece of jewelry or a paper holder. But Riken explained that it was still a magic tool. The shopkeeper suddenly came over and marveled at this magical item. Usually, all magical items created by water mages were beautiful, but he had rarely seen anyone create such exquisite items. Riken asked Mr. Kartal if he had any magic items in his art store, but he was more interested in jewelry than magic. Magic items were not bought as decorations. But he also knew that some magic items had an expiration date, and when it expired, they could be used for something else. In that case, they were useful to him. And then, turning to Sturl, he asked if the guy had thought about giving away some magic items. The owner was even ready to ask the Tower of Mages for permission to sell them, but Sturl explained that he was first of all a mage and not a jeweler, and would not be involved in that. He then went straight to Riken to tell her in detail how to use magic. He delicately folded the note into a small bundle and explained that now he had to carefully open the bird's beak and place the note there. As soon as Riken did this, the bird came to life, flapped its wings, and flew up into the air. Sturl explained that when Riken released the bird, it would return to him, and that this way short messages could be transmitted. Then the excited girl looked at the bird and wondered if she could accept such an incredible thing. But Sturl explained that the bird was too conspicuous, so it couldn't be used for anything important, and even though it looked beautiful, it was practically useless. But Riken was worried that it was too expensive for her. Sturl handed the bird to the girl and explained that he wasn't giving her some incredible magical tool. After all, the bird only had one function, so when Riken didn't use it, it would only act as jewelry. But he was worried that the girl would refuse, because she liked the gift. A happy Riken explained that she liked the bird, but she was worried that it was too valuable. Then the boy asked Riken to accept the bird, but if she didn't use it, the girl could return it at any time, and then he could use it for papers. Smiling and agreeing, Riken thanked him, even though she realized that in a few months, when her graduation was over and she met her husband, she could just thank him and give the bird back. When Riken and Sturl had picked out everything they needed, Mr. Kartal suggested they take a walk down the street since they had arrived, because at the end of the street to the east was the Rosenthal Gallery, which was definitely worth a look because of the amazing artwork. Mr. Sturl liked the idea, but he knew they would have to walk there, and Riken would be very tired, and her nanny would not like it. But Mr. Kartal persuaded them to go to the new gallery, and the nanny could stay with him for tea. The nanny knew that this tea was expensive, and the man explained that this was the reason why he wanted to give it to her. Taking advantage of this maneuver of the shopkeeper, Riken said goodbye to the nanny, promising to return soon. But she demanded that the young people not go too far away, and threatened that if they did not come in an hour, she would go after them. Cheerfully going down the steps, the girl realized that Mr. Kartal really knew how to talk to a man, and he even managed with the nanny, who was a very obstinate and always attentive woman. Sturl thought that Mr. Kartal was like a good friend who always knows what the other person needs, and in this situation he helped them. When Riken and Sturl walked down the street, the girls had a lot of fun just to look at the paintings. The paintings sold in the art store were painted by simple artists, like the rest of the streets, and Riken liked it much better. For the paintings of the masters could always be seen in the gallery, and they hung in the most conspicuous places in the houses of every aristocrat. But suddenly, looking at the sketches, the girl saw Rodrigo's signature, and she immediately recognized this master and could not believe that it was really the Rodrigo she thought of. Rodrigo would become a world-famous master in 20 years, But because his name became known after his death, his work would be sold all over the world. And that was very rare, because there were only a few cases when names became known all over the world. So it seemed incredible to Riken that his works were now being sold so easily. The seller explained that they were just sketches that could not be displayed in the house, so they were brought here. And it was thought that such paintings were not worth the attention of such a noble lady. But Riken asked how much the painting was worth. It was worth 1 silver coin, though they were willing to take 50 bronze coins for it. Riken couldn't believe that a painting that couldn't be bought for even the most enormous amount of money in 20 years was now selling for such a penny. But suddenly one wanted to buy the painting for Riken and asked her to consider it a small souvenir. Especially if Riken would think of it as a gift, then her mother wouldn't get angry. Then Riken explained that she thought 50 bronze coins was too cheap for this work and asked that Sturl buy it back for 2 silver coins. But he thought that even that was too little for her gift. But he paid the 2 silver coins and asked the seller not to tell the artist that he had sold it for 50 bronze coins, but to split it equally. After looking at what he had received, the seller immediately agreed. But Riken explained to the seller that she wanted to meet the artist and asked him to come to Viscount Copeland's house. When he arrived, he was to explain that he wanted to meet Riken Copeland, and the girl would alert the butler to his visit. Also, if the painter showed up, he could get a cash reward, so she would be expecting him. Then the excited salesman bowed to the girl and explained to her that Mr. Rodrigo would be delighted and grateful. Then he immediately ran to Rodrigo to warn him.